Good evening and welcome to Royal Report Daily, your most trusted source for exclusive royal family investigations. Tonight, we bring you a shocking revelation that will completely change everything you thought you knew about Meghan and Harry's secret life behind closed doors. And at the center of this story is a woman the world rarely talks about, Doria Ragland, Meghan's own mother. A woman who in 2026 has become one of the most quietly significant figures in this entire unraveling mystery. This is a story you won't find anywhere else. Stay with us. It began with a whisper, a small, quiet question spoken so gently it almost slipped away unnoticed. In early 2026, as the Sussex story began fracturing in ways no PR team could contain, Meghan's own mother, Doria Ragland, leaned in one day and asked something that purportedly froze everyone in the room. "What are Archie and Lilibet like? I've never really seen them." For a moment, nobody knew how to respond, because a grandmother is supposed to know. She's supposed to carry memories, birthdays, little giggles, sticky hands reaching for hers. She should be able to describe their smiles, their voices, their favorite toys, without a second thought. But in 2026, Doria couldn't. Not because she forgot, but because, according to those present, she says she had never truly been with them. Those 10 quiet words cracked open a door nobody expected to look behind. If the grandmother, the woman physically closest to Meghan in California, had rarely seen the children, then who had? And why did she sound almost afraid to ask? This was the first sign in 2026 that something about Meghan and Harry's picture-perfect family life didn't quite match the image being shown to the world. Something inside that Montecito mansion simply wasn't adding up, and once that first whisper escaped, more truths began slipping through the cracks. Truths from someone who had lived inside those walls far longer than most people realized. When the maid finally spoke, her voice was disguised. Not because she wanted attention. She spoke because she could no longer carry the weight of silence. She had worked in Meghan and Harry's home for months, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. She cleaned every room, walked through every hallway, and watched the daily rhythm of that household unfold right in front of her eyes. Yet, she said the house never felt alive. It didn't sound like a place where children laughed. It didn't look like a place where a family truly lived. Instead, she said it felt like a movie set, the kind where everything is placed perfectly for a single scene, and then frozen in time the moment the cameras stop rolling. Every room was arranged too perfectly. Nothing was out of place. Nothing looked used. Nothing carried the warm essences that real family life always brings. The maid didn't speak like someone trying to cause trouble. She didn't talk with anger or excitement. Her tone was steady, almost tired, like someone who genuinely wishes what she witnessed wasn't true. And she said the most unsettling part of all wasn't something she saw. It was everything she didn't see. A house with children is loud. Even the quiet ones leave a trail behind. Tiny shoes by the door, crayons under the table, toys where they shouldn't be. There's always a giggle, a cry, a small footstep, a mess somewhere. But in Meghan and Harry's mansion, none of that existed. The maid says she never saw toys, never saw small clothes drying in the sun, never heard laughter, never heard crying, not even a single small sock forgotten. Beneath a chair, nothing. She said she would walk into a room and pause, just waiting to hear something. Anything that would prove children lived there. But there was only silence. A heavy, still silence that made her stomach twist. One afternoon, she quietly asked another staff member, "Do you ever see the children?" The woman simply shook her head and whispered back, "Never." And this wasn't after 1 week, not after 1 month. This was after months of working sunrise to sunset inside that home. The world believed Archie and Lilibet were growing up happily behind those gates. But the people on the inside, the ones who cooked, cleaned, and spent their days in that house, couldn't find a single trace of them. It was this eerie emptiness that made the maid start asking herself the exact same question Doria Ragland had whispered in that room in 2026. Where were the children? Before we continue this investigation, make sure you subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. Hit that bell icon so you never miss our exclusive breaking news. We bring you the stories no one else dares to tell. And here's where the Doria connection in 2026 becomes even more significant. Because sources close to the family say that Doria's quiet question wasn't just a moment of confusion. It was the result of something much bigger. In 2026, People familiar with the situation say Doria had been kept at a noticeable distance from the children's daily life for an extended period. Despite living relatively close to Meghan in the Los Angeles area, and despite being the only grandparent physically present in the same country, Doria reportedly had very limited access to Archie and Lilibet. Sources described Doria in 2026 as a woman who is deeply loving but quietly troubled. A yoga instructor and social worker by background, a woman who built her life around care, connection, and presence. She is said to find the distance from her grandchildren genuinely painful. People who know her describe a grandmother who sends gifts, who asks questions, who calls, but who is rarely given the kind of open, natural access that grandmothers typically have. The kind of access that means you know which cartoon they loved this week, or which food they refused to eat at dinner last night. In 2026, as the palace began its quiet but serious review of Archie and Lilibet's royal documentation, questioning birth records, baptism, registrations, and succession eligibility, Doria's position became even more quietly significant. Because if the woman closest to Meghan, her own mother, was raising quiet questions about how much she truly knew these children, it only added to the growing atmosphere of unanswered questions surrounding the Sussex household. The deeper the maid went into her memories, the stranger the picture became. In a normal home, a mother moves through the space with natural purpose, checking on the kids, talking to them, picking up their things, responding to their needs. But Meghan's appearances, the maid said, never felt like that. At first, Meghan came by 3 or 4 times a week. But even then, she never stayed long. She would sweep through the front door like someone stepping onto a stage, always talking fast, always looking busy. The maid said Meghan was never alone. There was always someone trailing behind her. Marcus Anderson, a blonde assistant, sometimes even a full camera crew carrying lighting and sound equipment. To the staff, it stopped feeling like a family home. It felt like a production set, a place where scenes were filmed but never truly lived in. And as the weeks passed, Meghan's visits dropped to just 2 days a week. Staff whispered to each other that she seemed more like a guest than a mother, as though she were stopping by to check on a project rather than returning to her own children. Worse still, the maid noticed something deeply unsettling. Meghan's moments inside the house looked rehearsed. She would speak to people only when the cameras were present, glance at her own reflection more than she looked at the rooms around her, and move through the house as though performing a carefully prepared role. It began to make sense why the maid described the home as not belonging to a family. It belonged to an image. And in 2026, that image was starting to crack. The turning point came late one evening, an incident the maid says she will never forget. She was wiping down the kitchen counters when she heard shouting echoing down the hallway, loud, sharp, and angry enough to make her stop completely. She moved closer not to listen, but because the voices were simply impossible to ignore. She recognized Meghan's voice first, but what froze her was the sound of Harry's voice. Not angry, not firm, desperate, pleading. When the maid reached the doorway, she saw something that made her heart sink. Harry was holding Meghan's arms, begging her to stop as she tried to strike him. He wasn't fighting back. He wasn't raising his voice. He looked defeated. His face was red, not with rage, but with humiliation, with exhaustion. And standing nearby was Marcus Anderson, stepping in to pull Meghan back as Harry stumbled into a chair. The house went completely silent after that, a cold, heavy silence that felt different from all the others. The maid stepped in quietly and brought Harry a glass of water. He whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, she said she saw everything. The weight he was carrying, the pressure behind his eyes, the deep sadness of a man who once stood proudly before the entire world, but now seemed completely lost inside his own home. After that night, everything changed. The smiles became rarer. The warmth disappeared. The atmosphere thickened with tension, and the illusion of a happy home grew thinner and thinner by the day. But the part of her testimony that shocked people the most was something else entirely. The maid said she never once saw Meghan pregnant. Not with Archie. Not with Lilibet. Not at any point during the many months she worked inside that home. No baby bump. No morning sickness. No small, everyday physical changes that come naturally to a woman expecting a child. Nothing. At first, she thought she had simply missed the signs. But she worked 12-hour shifts, 5 days a week. She saw Meghan up close almost daily during those early months, passing through hallways, rushing past counters, adjusting her clothes, and still no signs of pregnancy. When she quietly raised her concerns with other staff members, they admitted the exact same thing. They had noticed nothing either. Meanwhile, outside the mansion gates, magazines showed glowing photographs, elegant dresses, perfect smiles, hands cradling a perfectly round belly. But inside the home, the image did not match the reality the staff was living through every single day. You're watching Royal Report Daily, the channel brave enough to bring you the real truth. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with everyone who deserves to know what's really happening behind those closed doors. Months after leaving her job, the maid sat alone in her small apartment one evening when the Netflix documentary about Meghan and Harry aired. She watched carefully, perhaps expecting to recognize rooms she had scrubbed clean, or hallways she had walked 1,000 times. But, as the documentary played, something deeply strange happened. The house shown on screen didn't match the house she had worked in. The angles were wrong. The rooms were shaped differently. Even the garden, the one she had walked past every single day, didn't look the same. The documentary showed Meghan smiling in soft golden sunlight, cradling a baby bump the maid insists she never once saw in real life. There were scenes of Meghan and Harry playing with the children in a bright, cheerful garden, chickens clucking nearby, laughter floating through the warm air. But to the maid, all of it felt foreign, unfamiliar, almost like watching actors recreate someone else's life in someone else's home. She had cleaned the real garden. She had swept the dirt beneath the real chicken coop, but she had never seen the children there. Not once. What the world received as intimate, heartfelt family moments, she recognized as scenes filmed somewhere else entirely. Perhaps a rented property, perhaps a carefully dressed studio, but not the home she knew. And that realization hit her like a stone, dropping into still water. If the footage wasn't filmed where they actually lived, what else wasn't real? That question stayed with her. And in 2026, as the palace's formal review of Archie and Lilibet's documentation quietly intensified, that question became part of a much larger conversation. The maid had always known Meghan and Harry guarded their privacy carefully, but the longer she worked there, the more she felt the house wasn't designed to protect a family. It was built to protect secrets. Every morning before stepping through the gate, staff members had to hand over their phones. Security guards checked their bags, searched their pockets, and scanned them for anything capable of recording or capturing images. Inside the house, cameras followed the staff, not the children. Silence followed them, not laughter. The rules were strict and absolute. No photos, no notes, no whispers to anyone outside those walls. She remembered one afternoon when a fellow worker simply took a photograph of flowers near the entrance. Within minutes, security stormed in, demanded the phone, and deleted the image. The air turned ice cold instantly. From that moment, the maid understood this was not about privacy. This was about control. And as time passed in 2026, she realized she wasn't alone in what she had felt. Quiet conversations happened in hallways, in the kitchen, in the laundry room. Never loud enough for security to catch, but whispered with a kind of unease that grew deeper each week. Workers who had been inside that house far longer than she had admitted the exact same things. They had never seen Archie. They had never seen Lilibet, not once. One woman who handled the laundry whispered, "There are no children's clothes to wash." Another worker who managed the groceries admitted quietly, "I have never once bought baby food." Even the security guards, usually stone-faced and completely silent, sometimes exchanged looks that said far more than words ever could. None of these people were dramatic. None of them were trying to start trouble. They were simply describing what their days actually looked like. And oddly enough, all of their days looked exactly the same. Empty, quiet, absent of any sign that two young children were growing up inside those walls. And this brings us to the moment in 2026 where every thread finally pulls tight. A grandmother, Doria Ragland, who whispers in 2026 that she has never truly seen the children up close. A maid who spent months inside the home and found a perfect, staged set, but not a real family, rooms with no toys, hallways with no giggles, days with no tiny footsteps echoing through the mansion. A mother who arrived rarely, always surrounded by assistants and camera crews. A father whose sadness grew heavier with every passing week. A Netflix documentary filmed in locations the maid didn't recognize. Security rules built not to protect children, but to protect silence. Piece by piece, in 2026, the story forms a shape, not a simple accusation, not a tabloid rumor, but a quiet, deeply unsettling picture painted by the very people who lived inside it. And at the heart of that picture sits a question, one first whispered by Doria, one echoed by every staff member who ever worked behind those gates, one the maid still asks herself late at night when she thinks about the house she once cleaned. If the people closest to Meghan and Harry, including her own mother, never truly saw Archie and Lilibet, then where were the children? The world has seen photos, polished interviews, and carefully lit moments wrapped in soft music and warm colors. But the people who lived and worked inside that mansion saw something completely different. They saw emptiness. They saw silence. They saw a story so carefully constructed that even the truth struggled to find a way out. And in 2026, as the palace conducts its quiet, formal review of the children's birth records and royal documentation, that silence is no longer just uncomfortable. It is becoming impossible to ignore, because in the end, every carefully built illusion eventually fades. And when it does, the truth is always there, waiting patiently behind it. That concludes tonight's special investigation here on Royal Report. Daily, we have brought you the shocking testimony of a maid who lived inside Meghan and Harry's mansion, combined with the deeply significant 2026 revelations surrounding Doria Ragland and what they together suggest about the hidden reality of the Sussex household. This is the kind of exclusive reporting you will only ever find right here. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe to our channel immediately. Click that bell notification so you are always the first to know when we release our next explosive investigation. Share this video as far and wide as you can. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let the world know what is really happening behind those palace walls. This is Royal Report Daily, bringing you the truth they're trying to hide. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in our next breaking report.